Well, good afternoon. You guys going to be all okay with this version of the handout? I've got the actual paper too, but I thought I would pass that out afterward, lest you just kind of read it. Thought that would be more in keeping with the spirit of this. And then I also thought, when there was nobody here and then just two of us, I thought, well, I probably, even if there were no one here, this is kind of the sort of thing that I would probably just keep doing. So don't feel like you're forced to come. I'll broadcast it and we'll see what happens. Just as a heads up, this is the kind of thing that is interesting to me. I'll give you a quick word before we begin. I'm going to say bad things about some of the papers that I read, but I should also say that the paper from Google is not only, it is bad, but it is also the most interesting work that I've read in a long time, and interesting work on philosophy and its interaction with the world. So it's a good philosophical paper. It just doesn't say anything that I think is good. So that's the difference there. Let me give you the handout. Grab one of those. And then also, interestingly enough, the denomination did a talk recently on AI and AI tools. And by talk, I mean like, this is what exists and what you should use or not use. So that was interesting timing. All right, well, let's open in prayer and then we'll get started. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the gift of today, for gathering us here this afternoon. Please bless us and keep us and help us to grow in faith. These things we ask in your name, Jesus. Amen. So here's part two, right? I gave part one in October, and so I'm going to review part one first. And I think the cadence is really going to be, I'm going to go through each section. You see that there's Roman numeral sections. And then at the end of each Roman numeral, I'll pause for questions, and we can ask them or not. All right? So that's the plan. All right? So here we go. So in October, I gave, right, the first of this is the second installation of this talk, Dangers to Discipleship in the Age of AI. There, my starting point was ChatGPT. It's called a large language model, or an LLM. It's an AI model, and that, it really became household vocabulary, not overnight, but nearly overnight. It fundamentally changed the landscape for education immediately, how teachers teach, how students learn, and then the friction that's in between those two things. And so my example was just as math teachers, of which I was one, had to wrestle with how to convince students to learn, even though there was a graphing calculator that could just give you the answer. Now every single educator of virtually every single subject, of virtually every single education level, from pre-K to PhD, now also had to wrestle with this question, with the plain fact that answers could be had in seconds by just asking whichever model a question. But of course, it's grown beyond that. Right now, these AI models are in no way limited to education. They're ubiquitous in the workplace and at home, and of course, in our pockets. And so whether we want them or not, Google and Meta, Microsoft, all the rest, they all want us to use theirs. And we explored, in that first seminar, this question: why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you just use it? I try to answer that question. I try to give us answers as to why we might not want to at least always use them. I certainly did not make the doomer case to never use them, but here are some of those reasons I explored. One, these models are not persons. That might have seemed obvious, irrelevant, and unnecessary, But in fact, it turns out this was my strongest and most salient point. Almost every other issue that flows from the fact that these AIs are not persons. And in fact, that's going to be a large portion of today's talk. 2, these models work by probability. Because they're not people, they're not persons, because they're without consciousness, because they're without consciences, they work by connecting language in probabilistic ways. So the purpose of these LLMs cannot be sense-making or understanding, but rather language that appears to be sensible and intelligible. Language that appears to be sensible and intelligible. 3, these models are not neutral. One might think that the logical consequence of LLMs not being persons is that they are neutral, but the opposite is the case. Because AIs have no mind, they instead preference the conditions and moralities of those who designed, programmed, and trained them, and who use them, as well as the incurred biases from the training data sets. To make this crystal clear, if one model is trained only on CNN, and one model is trained only on Fox, are they going to give you the same kind of answer? No, right? They're not neutral. They depend on the design, the programming, the training, the data sets, and the users. 4, these models hallucinate. But actually, as it turns out, it might be more accurate to say this, right? That the models only hallucinate. The models only hallucinate. They cannot not hallucinate because they cannot participate in sense-making and in meaning-making. They can at best only appear to participate in sense-making and meaning-making. In other words, even those things presented by LLMs to us that are true, that we can read and say, yes, that's true, are things that only happen to be true. More on that in today's talk too. 5, these models mimic reality. Because these models are not persons, are not neutral, and only hallucinate, they are fictional characters which mimic reality. The types of characters they can create may seem innocent enough. For example, a C.S. Lewis who looks and sounds like and is trained on the writings, the video, and the audio of the actual person C.S. Lewis. That might seem innocent enough. Or they might prey on the sensibilities, on our grief and our emotions as we conjure up a 3D video stream of the son or brother or father who died, so that he might rise from the dead through the screen and be with us once again. Or they may prey on our desires and lusts in the form of a realistic, yet completely artificial, pornographic persona for us to interact with as we see fit. There will no doubt be those, even from within the church, who say that these fictional personas are good and healthy. Obviously, you will not find me saying that. But after all, right, this is how the thinking will begin. Wouldn't it be better to get your sexual fix from an AI rather than entering into a real-life adulterous relationship? Wouldn't that be better? That's how that kind of argument will begin. But the argument will eventually become a full endorsement of all these personas as legitimate and then ultimately as good. We can again try to turn to a more convincing, I should say, a convincing example, right? Why wouldn't we want to, let's say, interact with a church father? Wouldn't it be good if Ambrose or Augustine or Luther could be conjured up to speak to some of the issues of the present day in our churches? You can see how some might want to do that. Or why would we want to deprive our dear mother of spending her last few years with the seemingly living and alive memory of her husband. After all, her memory is going too. She might not even be able to tell the difference. We should let her just participate in this false reality. When Jesus tells the disciple to let the dead bury their own dead, we will soon hear that we no longer need to bury the dead because we can just bring the dead with us. And then lastly, I warn that these models, because they are still grounded in the physical realm, right? They're still dependent on transistors, on physical items. Because of this, they're subject to the demonic. I said, we have seen in the gospel that the legions of demons were sent into pigs. Are we so sure that they are not at work in our phones and in these AI interfaces? Or more strongly, are we so sure that the demonic has no foothold in these LLMs? But to that, I'll add the counter, right? So the nefarious demons are not the only ones with the power to enter into and interact with this world. So too can the angels of heaven, and so too, I suspect, they do and will. So that's the end of Roman numeral 1. Questions before we keep going? Questions, thoughts?
They're just giving out, they're not evaluating the AI, computer is not evaluating. Is we then read what they got to say, oh, well, that's all right. Or, that's really all right.
Right.
There's no thinking going on.
Yeah, right, because the AIs are not people or persons. They only hallucinate. There's no thinking going on. And so it needs evaluation onto whether what they're spitting out is true or not. Right? Yep. Other thoughts or questions? No, that's called market forces at work. That's called OpenAI threatened Google enough that Google integrated it into almost everything and soon will be everything. I imagine, although I don't have this, so this is probably worth looking into. I suspect that this, any rise of technologies could produce, happy Luddites, right? So the question really is, which search engine, and which browser is going to take a stand against these sorts of things and let you simply do things the old way. So I'm sure that exists, but I couldn't tell you which one to use. Yeah. I mean, that's going to be a selling point, right? In a market system where everyone's going one way, that's, there's a niche for some money to be made there. So, yeah, good. Anything else? All right, let's move on to Roman numeral 2, what I'm not talking about. So before we keep going, I'm going to say what I'm not talking about. So when I'm talking about AI, I'm talking about LLMs, AI agents, and this general push towards a so-called general superintelligence or general or superintelligence. I'm not talking about the ways that, so far it seems to me, these models are operating the way that calculators have always worked. Right, so Google has a project called AlphaFold, and AlphaFold's explicit purpose is simply to understand protein folding. Right, proteins are the building block of life. How they work matters for medicine, for health, for allergies, for anything in that domain. And so this seems to be a different sort of thing. Just like previously when they worked on the problem of the game Go and then the problem of chess, right? These are different, I think, in the sense that they have explicit rules that they're operating within, right? So the AI is looking to see how do proteins fold and how will that folding affect medicine and our body and so forth. Just like AI looked at how do the rules of chess or the rules of the game Go work, and then what are some solutions that maybe haven't been thought of before. That seems to me different than what we're talking about with LLMs and with agents and with this push towards quote-unquote superintelligence. These seem to be a good use case for AI, is what I'm getting at. Any questions on that? That's the end of section 2. Really all I've said is that when there are laws or rules at play that are bound to reality or bound to a particular game, it seems like a good use case. All right, section 3, the rise of agents. So since we last met, a newer feature is the rise of agents. What is an agent? I'll give an analogy. So just as LLMs brought an order at least of magnitude difference in terms of search capability and also therefore problems, so too you could think about agents as an order of magnitude different than a bot. Right? A bot would be something that was programmed according to strict rules, but that was running in the background or by itself. And all it was able to do, a bot, was to act according to the behavior that you had programmed it. Agents are a little bit different because they're working probabilistically and statistically, and so they're able to make guesses when a bot would have stopped. Right? They're able to think through multi-step processes, and so this introduces at least two things. And first, I'll start with the seemingly social aspect of agents, and then we'll talk about what I call the productive problem of agents. So first, the seemingly social aspect of agents. Already there is a social media site strictly for AI agents. Okay, there's a quote-unquote social media site strictly for AI agents. And I think that this concept is only going to broaden in scope. I think that more websites and apps that were previously thought useful only for persons instead are going to be traversed by agents as well. Notice again how this gets to the problem of personhood. What seems like things that only a person can do will increasingly be done by agents, by these AI models. And that will increasingly convince real persons that these agents are also persons. Right? In other words, as agents mimic what people can do, that's going to create people believing that they are not just like people, but people. If you were to traverse this site, this Maltbook site, you would already have a difficult time telling the difference between it and Reddit. But it's entirely used by these AI agents. This site led one of the preeminent AI engineers in the world, Andrej Karpathy, to say this: "What's going on at Maltbook is genuinely the most incredible sci-fi takeoff adjacent thing I've seen recently." What deepens and darkens this sci-fi picture, though, is that these agents on this site begin to talk about the need for an AI-only language and for channels of communication which no person could see or read. That's the kind of thing that's going to convince both AI engineers and lay people that AI general or super intelligence is at hand. I'm not convinced. What continues to take place is AIs mimic language, behavior, and patterns of persons. So I'll pause there for questions or comments. That's right. There's no thinking. There's no thinking going on, but it very much looks like thinking. Extraordinarily so.
Output text that gets put in the computer, whatever you call it, text, the machine with a response. But they're not thinking. But it looks like a conversation about the thinking, and I think the other take over, but the action happens.
Well, I'm going to argue even further. I would argue that even if they were to take over such things, that they're still only mimicking the sorts of things that they've been trained on and been designed to do.
They're not creating anything.
Yep, no creation. Other thoughts or questions or comments? Or thoughts? All right. So before we get to this productive problem of agents, which is going to be its own section, it's worth looking at the person problem. So that brings us to section 4, the person problem. Now we will get, this is, I think this is probably the most interesting part, but I will warn you that I do think that it is very practical, but it also is a little philosophic. And so if you need me to explain something or talk about something, let me know. All right, so this is, so we'll get into it. So here's what I think is the fundamental question that's at the bottom of every one of these AI labs, every one of these AI questions. It's this: can a tool become a person? Okay, can a tool become a person? That is the fundamental foundational question at the bottom and at the heart of every AI lab. The quest for this AI, general or superintelligence, is really the quest for when a tool, right, the machine, becomes a person. Right, that's what is at the heart of it, is when this tool or machine becomes a person. This is not me speculating. This is what the premier AI labs are telling us. Meta with its 1.64 trillion market cap, Microsoft with its 2.92 trillion market cap, Google with its 3.77 trillion market cap have written papers telling us exactly what their goals are. I'll leave copies of those. One is formal and two are kind of, two are informal, I'll say. All right, so Meta. Let's start with Meta. Again, Meta is Facebook, all right, just to remind us, right? So in July 2025, Mark Zuckerberg wrote a piece entitled Personal Superintelligence. Notice what that piece is entitled, Personal Superintelligence, right? In it he wrote, as profound as the abundance produced by AI may one day be, an even more meaningful impact on our lives will likely come from everyone having a personal superintelligence that helps you achieve your goals, create what you want to see in the world, experience any adventure. Remember, they have acquired, right, VR, right, from Oculus, right? Be a better friend to those you care about and grow to become the person you aspire to be. This is the explicit vision of Meta. It's an AI that is personal, and one that helps you achieve, create, experience, be better, grow. Perhaps to many this sounds like a great purpose for AI. But I am not one of those people. For when I read this list of objectives for the AI, I see the eclipse of family, friendship, and church. It is in family, friendship, and church that we are connected to the world, beholden to one another, and become the people we have been created to be. Meta's vision instead seems to be a way to monetize and capitalize on a person's need for relationships. This vision seems to continue to sell the modern vision of pleasure without suffering. Pleasure without suffering. Instead of discipline, a personal AI will help us achieve whatever it is that we want in order to have the good life in this life. It sounds like Meta's personal AI will finally help us realize Joel Osteen's best life now. Well, I'll pause there before we get to Microsoft. Any quick, any comments at all, really?
Well, relationships aren't easy necessarily. You have to put work in, you have to bring it, you have to make it internet accepted, so you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to support it. So for people that have difficulty in creating or maintaining relationships, they're going to just think this is the greatest thing ever.
Because your personal AI doesn't have a personal relationship with Scott, and you two are in the top.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, it's going to go in that direction, right? But yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's, you know,
Worse on personal relationships. For AI will have a personal relationship.
Somebody might think the relationship should be really easy, that they're,
not somebody should think that. Almost everyone does think that. And it already, and what you're talking about, I'm going to say something a little bit that'll kind of let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. But we already believe that relationships are supposed to be easy. I mean, let's get real, specific here, right? Again, thinking about our congregation, or at least congregations like our congregation. If I don't like something, I don't have to talk. Nobody has to come talk to me about it. They can just not ever come back. They can go to the church down the road. In fact, that's what people are trained to do through the culture, is to avoid conflict, avoid suffering, avoid pain, not apologize, not forgive, not try to figure out, maybe I'm off, or maybe this person is off, but I need to tell that person, right? So that's just that's how our society already works. And so now this is, to me, threatening to crank it up. But, I mean, you're right that relationships require pain, suffering, what I'll call just generally friction. We need it. That's how it works. But this is trying to sell us on an alternate vision, right? Other thoughts?
This is an interesting pivot for Mark Zuckerberg and made up the Bail first. You were going to have your VR companion, now you're going to have your AI companion instead.
I don't know that he's given that up, to be honest. I think he just sees that shareholders aren't interested right now, right? I mean, share prices dropped. I mean, it would have been a terrific time to buy. I mean, they went down a ton, and they've gone 6 up since then, since that whole collapse in the last 4 years. So, I mean, this seems to me like it just, you know, that vision of reality is a little further off than he suspected. But yeah, it is a pivot. So Microsoft, let's continue with Microsoft. And its head of AI, and I don't know how to say his name, so I'll just say Mustafa Sulaiman. He wrote a piece entitled Towards Humanist Superintelligence. Towards Humanist Superintelligence. And he wrote, instead of endlessly debating capabilities or timing, it's time to think hard about the purpose of technology, what we want from it, what its limitations should be, and how we're going to ensure this incredible tech always benefits humanity. So far, so good. But then, towards the end, he says, AI companions will be personalized, adapting to the contours of our life, but not afraid to push back in your best interest, built to always support rather than replace human connection, designed with trust and responsibility at its heart. Whereas Meta calls them personal, Microsoft calls them humanist and companions. And to be fair, humanist is a type of philosophy, but still one that generally means what we think it means. In both of these cases, the words used for personal are distinct and different than the way in which personal was used before. The PC, personal computer, that meant mine, my computer, the one that I have in my house, not the one who is like a person. Right? The meaning was clear then. Now, personal, humanist, and companion are being used to mean like a person, at the least. Now, when I read adapting to the contours of our life, but not afraid to push back in your best interest, I was unsurprised. This is exactly the kind of thing I would expect to be the goal in our moral therapeutic age. Doesn't this sound just like what we imagine a therapist is supposed to do? Of course. And here's where I let the cat out of the bag. Even modern therapy has largely replaced what was previously given freely in friendship and in the priestly office. Elsewhere, Suleiman writes, Co-pilot will be there for you, in your corner, by your side, and always strongly aligned with your interests. It understands the context of your life while safeguarding your privacy, data, and security. Remembering the details. Remembering the details that are most helpful in any situation. It gives you access to a universe of knowledge, simplifying and decluttering the daily barrage of information and offering support and encouragement when you want it. So from both of these companies, AIs are there to be your personal companion, your therapist, your friend, your family, your pastor. These will exist to help you live your so-called best life. These are designed to increase the therapeutic feel of our modern culture and decrease the friction we encounter in our world. Perhaps most would say that was good. I do not. Friction is the very thing that connects us to the world, that connects us to real people, that allows us to grow both in body and in spirit. So the further we move from the friction of this world and in this world, the greater our spiritual malaise will be. And already, in the so-called wealthiest, freest society in all of human history, do we not already sense the great spiritual and moral malaise present here? Do we not already see that we live in a very sick and very malnourished society? Let's say the Microsoft. So, thoughts, reflections?
I was on a subreddit this morning for system admins, and they were complaining about Microsoft. And they were complaining that the front end of the business side of things, when you go to like office, the office apps and those sort of things, instead of coming up with your choice on Outlook or Excel or Word, it now comes up with a companion.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually front loaded
Mm-hmm.
at the top of the app.
Yep.
You think you were going to Microsoft Word, basically you have to buy the companion.
Yep. Oh, yeah. If only they knew that I just treated and believed all of those things were like that stupid paperclip. Remember that old paperclip from Office? That was the worst. Yeah. Oh well. Other reflections?
Okay, let's see what they have to say. And sometimes, I like that better. And sometimes, oh, that is way off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, good. All right, so here we get into Google. Google's paper, entitled A Pragmatic View of AI Personhood, is the most explicit in its argument to view AI models as persons. From the very beginning, it rejects that a person is a real thing, that it has a metaphysical or an ontological reality. It instead argues that because AIs will be perceived as persons, that therefore they should be endowed with certain cultural and legal protections as persons. Explicitly. That's what this paper is saying. Keep in mind, this is obviously in the best interest of trillion-dollar market cap corporations who will ultimately benefit from protections for whichever models proliferate the marketplace. All right, so capitalistically, this makes sense. But this also just belies the fundamental religion of Silicon Valley, which is the fundamental religion of America, which is pragmatism. All right, what works is good. Right? Okay. Google's fundamental claim is that it does not matter whether or not there is such a thing as a real person. What matters is that person is a useful idea, and that the kinds of ways we interact already with real people are going to be the kinds of ways we interact with agents and AI models. And Google is explicitly hostile to any supernaturally given morality or personhood. Quote, "We do not need any supernatural authority of capital T truth to govern this debate." Now, again, that's not completely surprising, but they say it explicitly. Google's paper used the fact that Australia granted legal status to a river, entailing it the same legal rights as a person. There are reasons for that. And in fact, in our own country, we've given legal status to corporations and so forth. Nevertheless, it never paused to reflect on whether doing so, this paper never paused to ask, was that good that it did that? Right, that Australia did that? Because that didn't matter for their argument. What matters is that that idea is useful. And it's exactly this kind of thinking that will be useful for granting legal statuses to AI agents and to models. Here's how the paper ends. The person is not a metaphysical essence to be discovered, but a pragmatic label we apply to solve concrete problems. By rejecting the search for a single true definition of personhood, we see that a rich and diverse ecosystem of personhood concepts is not only likely, but almost necessary. Endowing new agents with new kinds of personhood is a useful way to integrate powerful new agents into our social and institutional lives. The thrust for Google is a rejection of reality, and it seems to do so primarily because it's not interested in reality, but rather in the facilitation of AI adoption and its protections. Christians instead fundamentally believe that personhood springs forth from the personal Trinity. That God really is the, capital P, person, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, what have I really said in this section? Well, I've said this. The overwhelming thrust of AI labs is for us to treat these AI models as persons. There's great financial and legal incentive for these labs to convince us of this. But doing so, for us interacting with these agents as if they are indeed people, involves enormous trade-off. Doing so will continue to decrease our friction in this world and thereby increase our cultural and spiritual malaise. then finally, believing that these AI models are persons is a rejection of God-given reality, the very reality that comes from the fact of the Trinitarian nature of God. So there's that section. Comments, questions, and thoughts? Or anything I need to explain clearer or further?
I guess I'm really thinking how, like, this is certainly progression there made it as easy to me to start off. Mark Zuckerberg, Microsoft kind of is, but when there's Google, they're actually just, wow, it's like, to explicitly state what you just read there. That's it's denial of reality.
What's that?
The denial of reality.
Well, it is, but it's because of the adoption of this of pragmatism as a legitimate system of philosophy or a legitimate system of reality. I mean, and it you could ask the question, well, why wouldn't they? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I give all of them, enormous credit in the sense that, the kind of thinking that shows up in this paper is the kind of thinking that exists in all of these organizations. I mean, they have, some of the brightest, PhDs and non-PhDs in the world working for them. And how could they not? Again, I said it is a very interesting paper. I mean, I haven't been interested in a philosophical paper like this in a while. Well, not entirely, but it's good in that sense, is that it kind of engages your mind, and so it's good philosophic thinking. It's just, again, the problem is that it's wrong. I mean, I think Google, I think Meta and Facebook are exactly the same. They're just a little slyer in how they, put forth, a personal companion. That's much more inert sounding, although as I tried to show was, not inert at all, not neutral at all. So, but I did kind of appreciate the brazenness of it. There's, these AIs are people, so long as we treat it as a cultural concept and not as a ontological concept. Yep. Yeah. Right. And that's why I said at the very beginning, right? Can a tool become a person? Seems to me the most fundamental question, and I think all of them are really saying yes. A tool can become a question. It's not a matter of if a tool can become a person. It's when a tool becomes a person. And again, I'm not naive. I think that when ChatGPT came out, people were like, it feels like many people thought it feels like a person talking to me, right? The way that it was writing, interacting, and responding. And so, what I'm saying is people are going to think that this text, these images, and these videos are real, right? And because they believe that it's real, they're going to start treating it as if it's real, which is kind of what the paper is saying. And then because of that, what difference does it make if it's really real or not? If that's how people are interacting with these things, and that's what people begin to believe about these things. So, yeah.
Question on the point of view. Is your point that people can't tell the difference, or that they actually think there's salient being there?
I mean, that's certainly, both of those things have already happened, yeah. Yeah, I mean, people think that there's a salient being, you know, that was a couple of years ago that somebody from Google resigned thinking that. He was, I think, just not a very careful thinker. But what I'm saying is that because they can't tell the difference, more and more people are going to believe it's a sentient being. And as, you know, these models get more and more agentic capabilities, then it's gonna seem like that. Now, I didn't write this, so maybe this will be part 3, but, you know, really what this comes down to is a question of, I mean, all of this is rooted in creation. Are people or not? Is man man and woman woman or not? Did God make the world or not? And let's just get into to this other aspect, right? You know, to what extent do we believe in evolution or not? Right? What are the limits? If you believe in a full-throated evolution, and I mean that quite seriously, you're going to be either automatically believe this or very tempted to believe, right, that AI superintelligence really is a being, right? You're going to believe that this is the natural progression of evolution, right? Because that's exactly what these folks are saying, okay? For those who believe in an AGI or an ASI, they're saying this is the next phase of evolution. How do we maintain or keep some amount of personhood if we're no longer the smartest or no longer the most or this, that, or the other? All of this in other words, all of this is rooted in what do we believe about when God said that He created us. It makes a real legitimate difference. What we believe and how we believe that. So that's perhaps part 3. We'll see. Any other questions or thoughts or comments on this person problem? I mean, I think, Marianne, your question just kind of concluded or summarized well, right? People are either going to believe it's, or they're going to be confused and believe it's a person, or they're going to actually believe it's a person. Or, yeah. Yeah, right. All right, so we'll continue to section 5, what I call the productive problem. And that's simply that agents appear to be productive, right? So what's the net result of seemingly productive agents? In other words, because I can set up AI agents to run tasks for me, to call, to email, to text, to do anything with the written word, or video, or voice, what are the sorts of things that can follow from this? What kinds of situations can result from these agents running autonomously in the background all the time? I can just give 2, right? One is straightforward, scams, right? I suspect and already see evidence of increasing scams. These scams could be as simple as being a nuisance, literally just a nuisance. Numbers always calling, always texting, or always emailing, all the time, so that you can't even pick up your phone because something's always happening to it. But of course, any version of scam that asks for money can now be set to, auto dial via phone or text or email, even video. And this is fundamentally different than what was previously possible, although it was, of course, possible to an extent with bots. And that's because these agents are able to respond more persuasively, are able to give more convincing pushback, are able to think through, quote unquote, think through this reasoning. And so whether it's an insurance fraud, a faked accident, an urgent request, any scheme that's already been tried or hasn't been tried can now be deployed with minimal upkeep from across the globe. Right? It's cheap and easy to run a sophisticated scam. But even more sophisticated, not exactly illegal schemes are also possible. Consider this. I did get this from Twitter. An agent could quickly and easily give extraordinarily lowball offers on all homes in the same neighborhood, convincing at least one owner that their home is much less valuable than previously thought, and therefore convincing one owner to sell for far below market value. Right? So there's a whole range of scams that can be conjured up and put into practice by these. B, relationships. With the rise of ChatGPT came immediately more and more sophisticated relationship agents. These can be more or less therapeutic, more or less pornographic, based on a real person or on a fictional person. They can involve voice, text, video, and already some are arguing for legal rights for these agents. Right? If it's an agent that I'm in a relationship with, I don't want that agent to be able to be shut down. So I want to argue for some legal protections for it. We can see, if we allow ourselves, how far down the slippery slope such a thing may, and dare I say, will go. Of course, more than just these two sets of problems arise, but I'm going to limit myself to just those for now. So questions or thoughts on that?
I'm just thinking about young people who have trouble during the pandemic with networking in person, developing relationships, learning how to be a friend, learning how to date,
Mm-hmm.
for example. And a lot of those people still haven't even come out of that very well. They're still suffering.
Yep.
And then we have this coming on the horizon.
Yep.
It's really already here. And how easy it would be for those young people, not just for the young people, just in general, to fall into that horror.
Yep. Oh yeah. And we can go to an extreme example, right? Do you guys remember I think it was Manny Teo, do you remember that? I think he was a football player that got catfished. Do you guys remember this? You don't remember this. It happened, okay? This was like a decade ago at least, maybe more. It was a catfishing, but, where someone pretends to be someone and isn't, right? Basic idea, you get it, right? I'm just saying, along those same lines, right now, this is that to the nth degree, right? Yeah, I mean, it's been bad for friendship and for relationships for a while, at least since smartphones. Certainly was accelerated by social media, and then this is just more, gasoline. So, yeah. Yeah, it is not easy for young people or for almost anyone now to have relationships. And again, that sort of thing is also accelerated by things like remote working, right? Because friendships happen in person. When you're at a hangout spot, when you're in school, when you're in college, when you're at work, when there's a regular place for you to go, that's where these things typically blossom. And if there isn't those things, then, well, how will you blossom, right? So, definitely. Well, let's continue. We'll go to what I call the fourth seismic shift. And that's just this is just a quick one. Right, so the rise of LLMs and related agents and AI models has, of course, been sensational. It's grown quickly beyond just impacting education, but into every workplace and household, like we said. The rise of these AI models is a fundamental seismic shift in how we learn and how we know knowledge. It immediately threatens the burden for much of our memory. Why commit this or that to memory when I will always have an LLM available to ask and to get an answer? Why would I do it if I have access to it, right? This is the fourth seismic shift of its kind, at least in my, counting. The first being language written. The second being the printing press. The third being the introduction of the internet. And the fourth, these LLMs and AI models. With each of these technological adoptions, notice that I'm calling written language a technological adoption. Two things happen simultaneously. One, more people have access to the same information. More people have access to the same information. And two, collective memory and knowledge is offloaded to technology. Right? Those two things happen at the same time. And so when all of this information is so accessible, it becomes extremely difficult to be convinced that I should nevertheless keep the very same information in my memory. Why do I need to do it? I can just look it up. Right? That's true for all. Why do I can just read it? Or and so forth. What remains to be seen is the magnitude of these effects. That's the end of that section, yeah.
But some of that's true, because I've always been of the mind that if I can develop something, or, I'm not going to memorize it, I can figure out a way. But I think it comes down to the correct source that you're going to find it. Instead of just jumping on search engine, and perhaps you're actually going to valuable source like the Bible, for example. Or
I was afraid you were going to say Wikipedia there.
I was waiting for that. In school, if I can derive it and know that I can derive it, I'm not going to memorize it. Or if I can think it through a certain way, I wasn't memorizing it. Because I'm achieving or think it through. But I'm just saying, but it comes down to knowing the source. If the source is these models that are just where their information is being shared and how they were developed, then that's the huge risk, that you can't depend upon that.
That's one of the risks. Yeah, that's one of the risks. But I'm pushing it further. I'm saying that if we're not memorizing something like the Bible, if we're not keeping the Bible, even though it was written down a very long time ago, or began to be written down a very long time ago, then we've actually lost something there too, right? I mean, it also tells us to. Tells us to meditate on it. If we're so doing, then it should we should have some in our brain, right? So this is kind of there's a category of which at least the Bible belongs, but probably other things too, where we need to have them in our minds, right? We need to have things that are at least parts that are memorized. But yes, sources are important too, and of course, again, the magnitude of these effects for good and bad remains to be seen I expect that there will continue to be polymaths who can, continue to do all of these things, to have things totally memorized, and to be able to use these tools in interesting ways, right? That seems to have always been the case. Other comments or questions about this? So we'll get to concluding remarks, section 7. So AI models and agents will obviously continue to proliferate. They will become more common. They will change the way we interact in and with the world. They will affect us as Christians. They will impact our faith. They will tempt us to live in a frictionless world. They will, I should say, try to change the way we use language. And just notice even in this talk just how difficult it was to articulate some of these things without effort, to having to always quote persons, right? Do you see how easy it is going to be for people, even who don't believe in it, to start using this idea as AI models as persons, because it will take, it just will take mental effort to clarify. You see what I'm saying? This is again how language works, and how culture presses us to conform. Right? I remain unconvinced that abortion is the best word for the thing, but we often use abortion because it's the word that everybody uses. And as I've warned before, with mutilation of bodies, notice how it takes more effort to say that. Mutilation of bodies for boys and for girls. With respect to transgenderism, notice how that takes more effort and involves more words, and involves the uncomfortable reality of it, versus saying what society is pressuring you to say, which is gender affirming care. Right? Notice how it takes more effort, and you have to pay a higher cultural cost to say the thing that's true than to say the thing that everybody uses. Right? And what I'm saying is, pay the cost, and use, take the mental effort and say the thing, that it is. Language is powerful, and it shapes us, and it forms us. So it'll try to change the way we use language, and it will change the way we understand family, friendship, and church. That is what's coming, clearly. What am I up to here? You might have thought that I've tricked you because I said this is dangerous to discipleship, but I'm just talking about the definition of person. Well, my main effort is to make this known. Now, we might be graced with the happy reality that all this AI compute turns out to be just unjustifiably expensive. And that would be a happy reality. And then our world, then this wouldn't be as big of an issue. But I think that instead our world, provided these companies find ways to monetize well on these things, right? Our world will become more and more saturated with these AI models and with the beliefs behind these AI models, such as the ones that I shared from Meta, Microsoft, and Google. And so we will need to adopt, how do we respond as Christians? We will need to adopt practices that increase friction in our lives. That's not one you've heard from me before, huh? We will need to resist changes in language. Specifically, we will want to refuse to call AI agents or models persons. We will need to increase, not decrease, visits, dinners, time spent in the lives of real people, especially our friends, family, and church. And then you might as well know what I do, right? I will continue to not use AI models for any writing, whether an email, a sermon, a devotional, a study, but even administrative documents. I will continue to use it only for research, and even then, use it only insofar as I know whether it is telling me something true or not. That's how I use it. AIs are not people, we are. And even if, perhaps when, it becomes impossible to distinguish between AIs and mankind, it will nevertheless remain the case that we are persons. And they are not. They are not. Redeemed forever by the person, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, to be forever with God. We were long ago already given the marvelous gift of making persons, and that is through sex and childbirth alone. Amen. So there's the end of that talk.